it's definitely going to be the team sports and the contact sports that will suffer because of the social distancing. The individual sports, particularly things like tennis, squash, badminton, even cricket actually, may not struggle as much because there's less contact. But overall, it's the team sports that will take the longest. So there's going to have to be a very strict and rigid set of SOPs, standard operating procedures around how we conduct those sports. So there's going to be periods of isolation and what we call isolation. And what we do is we'll put them into areas where we know that they're going to be safe and clean. They're all tested. And then it's a controlled environment from there forward. So I think it's going to be difficult to manage logistically. They're already making moves in Australia. I know that Adelaide Oval has been set aside as one of these zones, competition zones, where it's an entirely encapsulated world, where there's a hotel in situ, the ground is in situ, everything is there. So that's a really interesting environment to work within. So that may be the model going forward initially for the sports that require contact, but only after all the rigid testing and all the SOPs are in place. So it's going to be some really interesting times for all the stakeholders involved in world sport and community sport as well. There's an element of fear here. Because there are lives at stake, and that's been proven already. So there has to be very rigid, very strict, and very process-driven returns to sport. Now, I mentioned earlier about having SOPs in place about returning to elite level sport. Well, the same thing will have to apply when our kids return to sport, both in the playground, at school, or structured sports at school, or after school and community sports. So there is justification for that fear, but let's not let physical activity, however, fall off the table. That would be my key point, because we know the benefits of staying fit and healthy from a cognitive perspective, from an immunity perspective, from a bone health perspective, from a cardiovascular perspective, and building, socially well-rounded kids. So there are enough reasons to say that it still has to be on the agenda. It's how we do it. So we just may, again, need to be more creative about this. We need to be more one-on-one based physical activity and physical programs for kids. I would be taking a lot of the physical routine once kids return to school, maybe out of the playground and into the classroom. And there's no reason to say why 2 or 3 minutes before every school session, every classroom session, the kids don't do their own structured instructional exercise routine. There are a couple of things here. One is that I think this is a perfect opportunity to build strategies that are going to separate you from everybody else in your team and your sporting world when you go back. It's also a perfect opportunity to build strategies, particularly mental strategies, that are going to make you not just a better sportsman, but a better person and a better human being as we move forward in life. The other thing is that, like anything, the longer you have to wait for something, the more you'll appreciate it when it actually arrives. So keep hanging on to that. To see something differently, you have to think differently. So let's hang on to that one. And then the last is, this is just a pause in your life. And at some point, you're going to go back and look, and it's just going to be a bad dream. So for young kids out there, particularly young sports people, that'd be my key messages for them. But the unique situation about this is that every single athlete on the planet is in exactly the same, or pretty much exactly the same position. So when we go back to returning to sport, particularly cricket, then pretty much everybody's starting from the same space. It's then who transitions the fastest into competition and the strategies involved there that's going to determine who will perform better and have the least injury. So that's what we're looking at, is that transition phase. But we can't neglect the foundation building stage, which is what we have to do now within the constraints and the physical constraints of the environments that we're all in. It is slightly different in India and the subcontinent because there are more rigid lockdown procedures in place here as opposed to perhaps in Australia and the UK. I'm talking in a cricket context here at the moment. And also space. The space available within a person's home is often greater in those environments as well. So we need to be very creative. I keep saying to the boys, think T20 when it comes to exercise at the moment. We've got to be creative, we've got to be adaptive. We've all got to be thinking out of the box, and coming up with new strategies and new ways to be physically fit and maintain what we call our foundation skills within the constraints of a limited physical environment. So that's where my team and myself have been pretty proactive in building and designing exercise routines and physical routines for all the players. And then on the back of that, again, which we'll talk about later, probably is the whole nutrition side of it. So I think we're managing to get it out there. And the beauty of having digital platforms now is that we're able to do it in a visual form, which does make it a lot easier for us to get our message across and to maintain certain training protocols that are required to keep these players at the elite level as fit as possible within these constraints. I think that this is twofold. One, because there's a immunity side to the physical as well. We know that exercise and training increases immunity, so that's critical. We also know that it's really important for kids to maintain physical exercise, not just for their physical well-being, but also for their mental well-being. What we need to do is ensure that these children are engaged enough so that we have ways to improve their cognitive function at the same time. So this is critical. So we all know that children require at least 60 minutes of moderate to intense physical activity per day to maintain cognitive function and improve cognitive function. So there's a cognitive side, there's an immunity side, and then there's a physical side. And fortunately, they all work together. So the term that we're using at the moment for our kids is a term that the BJSM, sports medicine, use, which is quarantine, which I think is a really good one. So we're really finding ways now for kids to stress their muscles, stress their bones, keep the weight-bearing loading going through all their muscles and bones. So yoga is obviously playing a very big role in this, but also weight-bearing in terms of jumping, hopping, skipping, lunge walking, stair climbing. So these are all really important strategies that we only need our home really to function within. So I'm looking at kids to say, well, my body is my gymnasium. Again, because this is unprecedented and we still don't know when the end is in sight here. So the biggest issue that I'm finding that we're dealing with the majority of our athletes, and everybody, not just our athletes actually, but everybody, is the mental side of it now. Because we've entered some unknown waters here that haven't certainly been charted before. So I believe it is going to be the mental side, but I also see this as an incredible opportunity for our players and all of us to learn how to strengthen that side of our persona as well. So let's build the mental capacity. Let's work on some of those strategies, which therefore will make you a better sports person, more resilient, more robust once we do return to sports. I see a lot of positives coming out of this negative situation, but I do agree with you that we're all very familiar with the physical world. We're all very familiar with training and finding ways to train and stay physical. Not all of us are great at the mental side of training and maintaining mental fitness and mental resilience. So that is the area that I think we need to focus on most. But I also see significant benefits for the athletes beyond COVID-19 lockdown in their respective sports because of the resilience they'll be building through this process. We're not only looking, yes, we're looking at the mental side of it and the mental resilience side of it. We're also looking at something, where we look at immunity. And we do know that significant stress lowers immunity because it raises cortisol, the hormone cortisol. So this mental does become very much a physical thing as well. We also know that fear also lowers immunity. So this is not a point in our lives when we want to have a compromised immunity system. So it's really, really important that we look at what's happening mentally, but also looking at how it's manifesting itself physically and working on that as well. So I don't think we can separate the two. So in this sort of particularly stressful, environment that we're all in, yes, we're going to take learnings out of that, how to work and beyond COVID-19. But I also think this is a great opportunity for our kids to work and understand stress, to work and understand fear, to work and understand this new environment that we're all in. So this is a great opportunity for parents to work with our children to get the best out of them as individuals, and give them strategies and new coping strategies that will take them forward for the rest of their lives. We talk about controlling what we can control, and certainly the environment that we can control now is our home environment. And within that, we can control what we eat and what we don't eat. So this is a really important time, and we do have time now to focus on this. I think this should be, a time for us to sort of reboot our nutrition sort of habit. This is the perfect time to do it. And again, when we look at immunity as well, the one thing that does compromise immunity is a poor diet, and the one thing that builds immunity is a good diet. So again, purely from the perspective of staying safe and strong and robust during this period, then we should be focusing on the whole nutrition angle very, very closely. And in fact, I would put emphasis on that above anything else. So when we talk about particularly people who want to lose weight, we say that it's 80% diet, 20% physical. You can do the numbers, but at the end of the day, one, you can't outrun a bad diet. That's the saying that we all use in my world. And two, you're only as good as, your performance is only as good as the fuel that you put into it. So it's really, really important that for our children, that this becomes the time that we teach them those habits and the reasons for those habits. So if there were, 2 or 3 takeaways from this, number one for me would be that let's look at what we call anti-inflammatory foods. So let's keep our system as uninflamed as possible for as long as possible. So the foods that inflame us, we know, are the processed foods and the high sugar foods. So for starters, this is a really good time to really start cutting back on processed foods and sugar. And if you want to go into the sugar a little bit more, we know that sugar increases inflammation in the body, and inflammation is a source of all disease. It triggers addictions, and you've got to ask the question, are we hungry or are we craving for something? When we feel hungry, ask that question. Am I hungry, really hungry, or am I craving? Because we know that the human body physiologically doesn't get hungry in under 12 to 18 hours. So if you're hungry in under that period, then it probably isn't hunger, physiological hunger. It's probably you craving for something that you're addicted to, or that your reward center in the brain needs triggering. And often that is sugar. And we know more of the science around that now. So yes, sugar fuels addiction. It reduces the effectiveness of vitamin C, and vitamin C is critical in this period, as we know, for boosting immunity. They both compete for the same receptor site on the cell, so it makes vitamin C less effective. As we know, it decreases immunity, and it decreases immunity because what glucose does in the bloodstream in high volumes is it binds to the proteins, and we know that healthy proteins are what builds your antibodies. So if they're not healthy because they're glycated or have glucose stuck to them, then that compromises immunity as well. And then, as we all know, that sugar is ultimately what makes us put on weight. The sugar and high levels of blood glucose, if we're not exercising at very, very high intensities, then the body has to do something with it. It has to store it. So sugar and particularly processed carbohydrates at this point in time is what causes fat deposition. So, just for keeping control of your weight, it's a really good thing to keep our sugar levels down and our processed carbohydrates down as well. So then on the back of that begs the question, okay, so what should we be eating at this time? And if you listen to, some of the best guys around, and I was listening to Peter Bruckner the other day. Peter Bruckner is probably the world's best sports medicine physician and Liverpool football doctor, Australian cricket team doctor. He was saying that pretty well all of us should be on low carbohydrate, high protein, healthy fat diets at the moment. One, because carbohydrates is what raises blood glucose, which is a source of inflammation and also fat storage. So the building blocks for our immunity are our healthy fats. So things like eggs, seafood, coconut oil, olive oil, ghee, yogurts, milks, cheeses, things like that. They're all your avocados, nuts. They're all our healthy fats. They're the things that we should be loading up on to boost immunity. Loading up on vegetables, good, fresh vegetables, particularly dark green vegetables. High fiber fruits is what we should also be loading up on, and telling our kids to load up on apple, pear, orange, sweet lime, guava, papaya, berries, but the whole fruit, not fruit juice. I'm talking about the whole fruit here. And when you are eating carbohydrates, please let's avoid wheat wherever possible. One, because wheat is very inflammatory to the system, and we don't want that, as we know that's the source of disease. And wheat also has a very high blood glucose load, so it obviously then converts to fat. So I would be cutting back on wheat, and when we're talking about carbohydrates, let's stick to our complex, high fiber, and what we call slow carbohydrates, okay? Ones that don't raise our blood glucose very high. So that's all your traditional grains. Let's go back to our traditional Indian grains, nachni, ragi, bajra, jora, some of the unprocessed oats, and then, like I said before, lots of vegetables, things like quinoa, buckwheat, lentils as well. So they're all the things that I'd like to see people eating more of. Definitely eating less of the processed foods and anything that is high in sugar. That would be my key message here.